What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host, Emergency Podcast. Frank Reich, hired by the Carolina Panthers. Exciting times in Charlotte for some, not for all. Joining me to break down the hire, Ryan Wilson and Tyler Sullivan, aka Sully. What's up, boys?
What's going on?
Hello.
God, I love an emergency podcast. Oh, it gets my blood. It gets the
juices flowing.
The veins going. Yeah, the juices go. I don't know.
The veins.
I don't know where you're going to go
Veins
for a second. I was like,
my veins. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, great news for Frank Reich. Not so great news for Steve Wilkes. Although I said at the time that Steve Wilkes was hired, there's he could win every single game, and he is not getting that job. There was some conversation that maybe Steve Wilkes got the job and talked Frank Reich into being the OC, which I feel like would have been best case scenario. This is 1B. I mean, it's a great hire. It sucks for Steve Wilkes, of course, but I think Frank Reich can make an argument that he got treated unfairly on his way out of town in Indianapolis as well. So I think this is I saw some folks on Twitter sort of compare this to the Matt Rule hire. I feel like it's the exact opposite. Like there's no Matt Rule in this hire whatsoever.
This is not polar opposite of the Matt Rule hire. What?
Yeah.
By the way, but I mean, I don't know if I got to look and see if I tweeted this or not. I'm just going to read. I'm going to read a text message that it doesn't count if I send it to a text thread, I guess, even though there are 15 people in the text thread. But I'm just going to read the text thread, the text that I sent back. What day did Matt Rule get hired?
It's in January, maybe,
by Nebraska.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
He was hired by Nebraska on. Yeah, so it was like the middle of December. And actually, I sent somebody when they fired Rule from the Panthers. Somebody on another thread was like, "Hey, who are the Panthers going to hire?" I was like, Dan Quinn or Frank Reich. But this is I just find this amusing. I was like, Tepper wants to shoot for the moon. Guarantee he whiffs horrendously on Sean Payton before settling on Dan Quinn or Frank Reich. Which, here we are. I mean, look, I don't think that there's a lot of Panthers fans who are disappointed at the idea of not hiring Steve Wilkes on a full-time basis. I understand that. He got the locker room back to a much better place after Matt Rule was fired. He had them competitive in what is a bad division. And then he did a really good job in his role as interim head coach. And we talked about this some, Wilson. I don't like the idea of hiring an interim coach. I would have given a pass to the Panthers if they decided to go with Steve Wilkes. But he had that one season in Arizona. He got shafted. Bad job choice. Didn't have had a horrible year. Horrible offense, by the way. I'm not saying it's all his fault. And then the 5-5 with the Panthers, like good effort. But as Wilson pointed out when Rule was fired, he was going to have to like really work some magic in order to get that job, Sully. And I think that while it would have been an okay hire, like Frank Reich, for as much as we want to dog him for the ending, had a really good run in Indianapolis, particularly given that the quarterback situation was so unsettled. Andrew Luck retired after he took the job when Josh McDaniels backed out. Andrew Luck retires. He has to do a season with Jacoby Brissett. He does a season with Phillip Rivers. He does a season with Carson Wentz. And then he tried to do a season with Matt Ryan. They never had an opportunity to really settle the quarterback situation for him to develop a quarterback. And I think maybe the opportunity here, Sully, in Carolina could be a different one.
Yeah, I definitely think that quarterback needs to be, and I'm sure it was talked about during the interview process, what is going to happen. Because Frank Reich can't walk into another situation like he did with Indianapolis, where he had 74 games and he had for like 4.5 seasons and had 7 different starting quarterbacks. That's just untenable. You can't have that and to expect to have success here. So for Carolina and Ryan, and you could probably speak to this more as well, if they go into the NFL draft, it's probably quarterback or bust at this point, right? I don't think that he's signing on for them to continue with Sam Darnold or to get in the Derek Carr mistake or anything like that. He wants to build something.
That was going to be my next question as well. So they're currently picking 9th. I talked with our buddy Rick Spielman about this on With the First Pick podcast. He does not think the Raiders at 7 are taking a quarterback, so he doesn't think they're even trading up. He thinks they're going to be in the free agent business. Tom Brady is the obvious choice. We'll see what happens there. After Tom Brady, there's not a lot, though, in terms of, what are you going to re-sign Derek Carr and call him something else?
Trade for Aaron Rodgers.
Garoppolo, maybe.
So, right, Jimmy G's another name, too. So if you're sitting there at 9, you're probably going to have to move up. So this is Frank Reich coming into a new situation. General manager's still there, and you're going to have to make that decision. Now, Frank Reich has a pretty good track record with quarterbacks. The Carson Wentz thing went belly up, but it started off pretty well, and he was there during the process of evaluating them, and he's told the story about how he went out to North Dakota State, and they were, hit it off immediately, so on and so forth. So we'll see how that unfolds.
Sorry, not to interrupt, just but like to the Eagles' point, like there was a lot of talk after Frank Reich left after the Super Bowl to take the Colts job, when Doug Peterson's offense, it was like, was it for, like, I mean, people, this happens all the time. It's like, was it Frank Reich or was it Doug Peterson, or was it really was Frank Reich the secret sauce? Like he was considered like upper echelon coaches in the NFL, Wilson, when he
And this year, no one once mentioned Frank Reich's name as Trevor Lawrence turned things around with Doug Peterson. So, right. So we talk to be talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I will say, going back to Steve Wilkes quickly, I don't want to beat on this drum too much, but Brinson, you can tell me what these three names have in common: Steve Wilkes, Dave Culley, and Lovie Smith.
They're all defensive coaches.
All defensive coaches.
They're also all black. That's weird.
And got 1 year and got the boot. And look, as I said from the moment he was given the interim job, Steve Wilkes, there's nothing that man can do. They could win the Super Bowl. He ain't getting that job. I do think if they'd won the division and then like stolen a playoff game, he would have kept the job. Maybe, but
I think if you make the division, you're keeping that job.
Yeah,
I think how you can. They played strong under him.
I'm telling you, man,
that's my point. And my other point,
people in Charlotte really like Steve Wilkes and like the idea of keeping.
Well, let me put this theory to you, Brinson, because Frank Reich's a great hire. I think it actually is a good hire in terms of helping to fix that organization. But I think, and this is the point I was making over the course of the season when Nathaniel Hackett went belly up, and we see some other coaches around the league that seemed overwhelmed with the first year duties. Cliff Kingsbury on some level. I think Steve Wilkes, you need an enforcer in a sense. You need someone to be disciplined. And I was sort of thinking about Kyler Murray when I mentioned that previously. And then you can have the guys around you because you're the manager. You're Michael Scott in a sense, but not dysfunctional. And then you need the people underneath you. You need the Dwight Schrutes to handle certain things. You need the Jims to handle certain things, but all at a high level, not as mediocre. So you have your coordinators coordinating. They're superstars, and we see that out west with the Rams and the 49ers. And then the coach is the one being the heavy. And I think you see success with that. I mean, it clearly works in Pittsburgh. It works in New England when you don't hire a defensive guy to be the play caller. So that's sort of how I'm leaning after we've sort of the swing had gone one way in which we just hire these up and coming OC DC stars that aren't necessarily equipped to be head coaches.
I do think I like to talk about the ex-girlfriend factor, right? When you talk about head coaches and who, when owners and GMs hire somebody or like they fire somebody, they're like, all right, we got to go get somebody else. Like, you look at, I mean, it just happens. Like it happens very, very frequently. And I think Frank Reich is a very much a ex-girlfriend. Like you go hire the opposite type of person, right? A lot of times when you see a defensive coach fired, they want to go get an offensive coach. When you see an offensive coach fired, they feel like when you hire a young, up and coming head coach and he's fired, and then you see him go get like the veteran. And I think this is a case of that where Matt Rule was the unproven college coach making the leap to the NFL, and it flamed out disastrously. And it was nearly
because he didn't iron his clothes,
right? Because he wears like wrinkled khakis. I mean, like by the way, you can Matt, you can buy like stretch khakis now, like that don't wrinkle. Like anyway,
or you can pay someone to iron your pants for you. Either way,
you make $70 million. Maybe have a dry cleaner or an assistant who hang your pants up while you're sitting at your chair. Whatever. Anyway, we don't need to get on that tangent. There's many different paths we can go down that way, and nor should I insult somebody.
Can I mention quickly something from our buddy Joe Person, who covers the Panthers for a long time at The Athletic, former William Mary, along with me. He tweeted this out shortly after Frank was hired. Besides playing on the Panthers' inaugural team, Frank Reich later went on to seminary school in Charlotte. His brother's the longtime coach at nearby Wingate University, and one of his daughters was had recently joined the Panthers marketing department. So there's a lot of synergy there.
That happened like a month or so ago, and there were a lot of people who were like eyeball emojis. The Panthers hired Frank Reich's daughter. I believe Frank Reich took the first snap in Carolina Panthers franchise history. Pretty cool. Comes back to be the head coach. But even to the point, like Rule flamed out disastrously. And now you have a guy who is really, truly like a steady hand type of coach. Doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. Is into analytics, is into being aggressive as a play caller. Goes forward on fourth down, but isn't like the Brandon Staley type that it's a big deal when he does it.
Has played for Battlesome Owners.
Has
worked for Battlesome Owners, excuse me.
Probably interviewed with David Tepper. Was like, this guy is so calm and normal. Like, what the, like he's like, this guy's chill. After working for Jim Irsay, and I've always been a big Frank Reich guy. Ever since sort of we covered that Super Bowl in 2017, and for whatever reason, I spent a lot of time around the Eagles, and just like I talked to him a couple of times. I mean, didn't know me from Adam, but like I just came away like really, really impressed by his approach and his demeanor. And I think it's what a team like the Carolina Panthers that has really, frankly, been, like, and Ron Rivera was, a steady hand too, but like they need an offensive mind who is a professional. Like you talk about Doug Peterson coming to Jacksonville. It's a professional who has run a building, has been in an organization like that for a long time, Sully. And I think Frank Reich brings that to the table.
Well, yeah, I think that's this kind of what I was going to kind of suggest here too. This makes sense for both sides. If you look at kind of what their history has been over the last few years with Matt Rule, you kind of got the offensive guy, but everything else really just fell apart, was not great whatsoever. And then if you're Frank Reich, you're going to an organization where it's just veteran quarterback after veteran quarterback. I think now, after both of these kind of experiences where it's Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Matt Ryan, Phil Rivers, all these guys, to me, this leads to me to say this team's going to completely strip it down, go young at the NFL draft, try to develop a quarterback. Looking at both of their backgrounds from a roster building standpoint, the thing that suggests to me is that they're going young at this position. They're going to strip this down basically to the studs and get a quarterback and try to revive it that way.
Sounds like a new homeowner.
I'll tell you what. No, look, I know you ain't in here to sell tickets, Frank Reich, but I'll tell you one thing.
What?
You go out and sign Jacoby Brissett. You just created a whole bunch of new heavy Panthers fans in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the surrounding areas. And I think that's a distinct possibility that Jacoby Brissett, who's a free agent leaving the Browns, would be a perfect fit for this Panthers team. And then you can make a decision about, do you want to go get somebody else in
You've
the
said
draft?
crazier things. I will go give you that.
Like, do you want to trade up and grab CJ Stroud?
Let me ask you this, Brinson and Sully both. Because Brinson, you've been sort of Sean Payton's the dude that everyone needs to get to fix their team if they have a young quarterback. Obviously, the Panthers don't have that young quarterback, but what would you rather have? Frank Reich and pay him whatever you're paying him, or would you rather, as the Carolina Panthers, or would you rather have Sean Payton, give him a first-round pick, and pay him $25 million a year?
I would rather have Frank Reich and the first-round pick than Sean Payton.
Me too, for sure.
Yeah, I think.
Assuming we're talking number 9 overall, going to New Orleans, which I think was going to be the cost.
My point is, I think mostly I'm blaming you, overselling the Sean Payton effect on a team with a franchise quarterback.
Was a team without a quarterback.
Good point. Will McClain in the took the first snap in Carolina Panthers franchise history, threw the first touchdown pass in Carolina Panthers franchise
caught
history.
The first touchdown pass. He did everything. Kicked the first field goal.
No, he did not actually. Would you like to guess who caught that first touchdown pass?
Steve Smith as a 12-year-old.
No, it was Pete Metzelaars, a tight end from
right?
Who was tight end.
Parts unknown.
Third-round pick from the Seattle Seahawks, went to Wabash College. He's the best player in the history of Wabash College. Any guesses as to the first pass, the first snap in Carolina Panthers franchise history, taken 13:08 left in the first quarter after they held the Falcons to a punt.
Was Dom Capers the first coach?
He was the first coach.
Thought he was. You guys have the same hairdo for what it's worth.
Yeah. So his is fake. I believe that there was who's the DC on that team? I want to say it was maybe I'm
guessing it's unimportant for the poor.
Oh, it's Vic Fangio. Ooh, interesting.
I think he's going to Miami.
You think so?
Apparently, Mike McDaniel wanted him last year, and they just fired what's his name, Byers, and I think that's angling for Fangio. But I mean,
but I tell you what, I don't know. I mean, like Frank Reich was only there 1 year. I'm trying to think if there's any other connections with them. When he went to the Colts, remember, we've never seen Frank Reich hire a defensive coordinator of his. I guess he hired Gus Bradley this year.
This was Josh McDaniel's staff, is what you're saying?
A lot of it was
from McDaniel's staff. No, he was.
I'm laughing because McDaniel's pulled out, allowed Frank Reich to get that job, and sort of got his head coaching career going while McDaniel's is sort of stalled in his first year in Las Vegas.
Sure. I just sort of wonder, like, I wonder if there's any connection there with like Vic Fangio type, or he might be, I don't know. Vic Fangio. I mean, you look at what the Panthers have on defense. That's a really interesting setup on defense. If you brought in a guy like Fangio with their linebackers, their front, I mean, that would be spicy.
Brian Burns did say after the season, before the hire, obviously, that he wanted Steve Wilkes, and a lot of the people in that locker room did. So I don't know if Steve Wilkes would come back as a DC or if he would rather move on.
That's the big question, right? Because again, you were saying it on the opposite end where Frank Reich could come in as an OC and
Right.
Steve Wilkes would still be the head coach. I don't know if you can do it the other way around.
Right.
To me, it just doesn't make sense because especially if all of a sudden
Steve Wilkes has already said, or it's already been reported that he's not going to coach with the Panthers this year.
Yeah,
and I think you can't go back to
it doesn't make
DC
any sense.
Then,
But if you're Steve Wilkes, if a head coaching opportunity doesn't come in front of you this offseason, I'd be looking at the San Francisco 49ers. If all of a sudden D'Amico Ryans gets a head coaching job, I'm going over there to coach Nick Bosa and those boys for a
Pretty good
season.
track record. Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans. Not
Bosa,
a young.
Bosa also one of the things I like to hear Sully say from this Boston accent. Bosa. I mean, I think that's again, it stinks to be Steve. It stinks for Steve Wilkes because he's just got 2 raw deals in his 2 head coaching stints. But I don't. There was, like you said, Sully, there was no chance that they were going to hire Frank Reich and then use Steve Wilkes as the DC. Do you need to go, Wilson?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wilson's going to bounce. We can we'll do winners losers real quick. See you, Wilson. Thanks, buddy. I'll say that I'll say a winner here. I'm going to do a combo winner here. Carson Wentz and Jacoby Brissett, because I don't think that they'll try to bring in Carson Wentz, but the Panthers tried to get him before he's traded to Washington. And I mean, what is he going to cost now? Obviously, Washington, I would assume, is moving on from him. Like, was he going to cost a 5th round pick, or you just grab him on a vet minimum salary if the Washington cuts him? I'm not saying that's a good thing. And you would think that Frank Reich learned from his last mistake of pissing off an owner by getting Carson Wentz and losing football games and wants to stay away from that. But I do think you will see a steady veteran presence brought in by the Panthers in the form of either Jacoby Brissett or Carson Wentz. Matt Ryan, it seems like that's, I doubt he's going to be in Indy, but I think that ship has probably sailed, although not impossible. And then I think you probably see them use either the 9th pick overall or whatever pick they get next year on a quarterback. You would have possibly Drake May, which would really piss off some Panthers fans would love it because a lot of them are Carolina fans, or potentially Caleb Williams in next year's draft. So, and look, I think the Panthers will be better than they were this year with Frank Reich as the head coach. Like, I think if Reich had coached this team for an entire season, I think they would have, maybe they would have been about the same in terms of like 500 record with the setup they have.
Yeah, and I think they probably would have won that division considering what it was. It was just, a dumpster fire and a under 500 team winning it overall. But I don't know what that really tells you. I think one of the big winners, like you said, I do think that you will find Jacoby Brissett or somebody of that ilk joining that team. But I do think that they'll bring aboard some sort of rookie. I just keep hammering that point home. I think this is a good thing for both organizations because you've both kind of gone through those veteran retreads, and it just doesn't really work in the NFL. Like, this is not in my opinion, a Derek Carr destination, a Jimmy Garoppolo, the quarterbacks that still feel like they could be a starting quarterback somewhere. So if you're a Carolina Panthers fan that wants them to fully reset, I think that the hiring of Frank Reich tells you that they're going to do that, considering both of their backgrounds. So whether that's trading up in the draft, going after, Stroud, Will Levis, or somebody like that, or waiting a year later to maybe, go to the bottom and grab somebody even higher in the draft the year after, that's possible. But ultimately, I think this is a good hire. Yeah, the Steve Wilkes thing stinks, and you maybe wish that would be a little bit cleaner. But ultimately, in a vacuum, I think this is a great hire. All of a sudden, you can make the case that, I don't know, do they have the best head coach in that division all of a sudden? Arthur Smith, Dennis
easily.
Allen.
I mean, not easily. I mean, like I would lean Wright 1, Arthur Smith 2, Dennis Allen 3, and Todd Bowles 4. Yeah. That would be my like off the cuff rankings of the NFC. Yes, I would. Yes,
and none of them are getting fired. Like, we've already kind of missed that whole boat there. So
the Panthers found a quarterback, and they got this defense, and you can, the offensive line takes a step forward. Icky has a better year. And we've seen, look, the offensive line under Frank Reich in Indianapolis was, up until this year, was really, really good. Like, one of the best in the league. Now, having Quentin Nelson helps that. Worth noting, and I mentioned Vic Fangio too, the Panthers had already interviewed Vic Fangio for their defensive coordinator position, I believe. Like, they had already, in case they didn't hire Steve Wilkes, they wanted to have some DC interviews out there. And you had the connection with Vic Fangio from being in the Carolina before. You had the connection with Frank Reich and Vic Fangio working there. Like, if you told me you got Fangio and Frank Reich, I feel like you are cooking. Like, the Panthers are in a really good spot for 2023. So any losers for you?
I would say, well, Steve Wilkes. I mean, Steve Wilkes is the obvious one, right? I mean, that you could not have done a better job outside of possibly winning that division and getting into the postseason.
Yeah.
to secure yourself that job. But I will say, how often do it should not be that surprising, I guess I should say, because how often do we see these interim guys actually get the job and hold it for more than a year or 2 years later? There's really no history. I mean, it's probably going to happen in Indianapolis, but that's a whole other story entirely. But you never really see, it never really works out. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, or, owners just being impatient is a conversation for another day as well. But it's nice to see them at least move on. They've figured out who they want to go with, and I think it's a good hire.
I think getting out. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's an obvious loser. By the way, it's worth pointing out, Frank Reich was fired with a 40-33-1 record. Like, he had a 55% winning percentage. Yeah. Never won one playoff game, lost 2, but went to the playoffs twice and had a 9-8 record last year. Would have been in the playoffs had that not for that collapse in Week 18 against the Jaguars. Like, you take out and I'm not trying to fluff it up. I'm just saying, his second season, Andrew Luck retired, and they had to roll out Jacoby Brissett and Brian Hoyer, and the other guy who threw a pass was Zach Pascal. Then he goes 11-5 with Rivers. He goes 9-8 with Carson Wentz, and then was 3-5-1 when they got fired with Matt Ryan, and really not given a chance to turn it around. Like, it's not insane to suggest they could have come back and won that division. Jeff Saturday wasn't going to do it.
Everything went wrong during Frank Reich's tenure. He was accepting that job, obviously, in the aftermath of Josh McDaniels, but was accepting
which also is like a thing that went wrong because you don't get all your guys. Yeah.
Which is crazy in its own right, considering that. And again, I lived that. I saw that whole thing unfold very up close. And not only do you not have to hire your own staff, but the quarterback that you're joining decides to walk away, and Andrew Luck. And so and the organization, I think, because of that ownership, was impatient, did not want to build through the draft because they had just previously done that to get Andrew Luck. So they were more prone to go after those veteran guys, and very similar to the interim head coaches. How often do you see that even work out?
I'll tell you. All right, I'll tell you who my loser is. Jim Irsay, because I think you were about to go. There's the rumors that you're hearing right now, and there's a lot of buzz about it, is that they are going to hire Jeff Saturday full time. So if you go from Frank Reich and 3 winning seasons in 4 years with 4 different quarterbacks and a 5th quarterback, if you want, 3 winning seasons in 5 years with 5 different starting quarterbacks. And then you go to Jeff Saturday, whose first NFL coaching experience was this year as an interim, who you brought in to replace Frank Reich. I think you have created, and no one else in your front office wants to hire Jeff Saturday, which is a possibility. I think you have made a massive downgrade at the head coach position, and that it will come back to haunt you severely over the next 3 years, because if Jim Irsay is willing to push this Jeff Saturday hire through, he is not very likely, and again, this hasn't happened yet, he is not very likely to fire Jeff Saturday after one bad year.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I can kind of build off that a little bit into what I was saying earlier. I think a loser in this, and I wish Wilson was here to kind of back this up, but I think a lot of the teams that are in that 3, 4, 5, 6 range that are looking for quarterbacks are a bit of a loser here, because Carolina, I think, is going to try to get a young quarterback. And that is more competition to try to trade up for that number 1 overall pick, or to get into that top 5 for a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or a Will Levis. I think that you add another team in there that's going to hike this price up, with Carolina going young, in my opinion.
Yeah, in that same vein, you could suggest that now here's an interesting one. I guess they need a quarterback too, so it's not the Colts at 4. Could be changed to the Panthers. Yeah. So and worth noting too, at number 5 overall, the Seattle Seahawks have the Denver Broncos pick. Scott Fitterer, the Panthers GM, came from Seattle. The Seattle front office with John Schneider and Pete Carroll love to trade down. So if the Bears don't take a quarterback, let's say they stand pat and just take Javon Carter or Will Anderson, whatever they do. Texans probably take a quarterback. Cardinals are not taking a quarterback. Colts could. Cardinals could trade down, of course, but let's just say everybody standing pat. The Colts take a quarterback. So you got 2 off the board. The Panthers and the Panthers and Seahawks, are prime trade candidates there.
For sure.
Or the Panthers to jump ahead of the Falcons and the Raiders, and maybe those teams don't need it. Maybe the Panthers could sit at 9, but just because of that connection, there's a decent possibility you could see Carolina move up there. Carolina could also be like, hey, screw it. Let's jump the Colts. like really F Jim Irsay over and like jump up to number 3 and draft a quarterback ahead
They
of.
could stand pat too. I know Wilson has Anthony Richardson, coming off the board there at 9. In his
It wouldn't be
recent mock
crazy.
draft.
It
So
wouldn't be crazy at all.
it doesn't have to be aggressive and move up, but I just think that team's going young. I see. Like I don't think the Daniels. I don't.
Daniel Kerber asked on in the YouTube chat, chances of Derek Carr in Carolina. I don't think it's that crazy.
I don't think it's crazy. I just don't think that like you're really gonna, if you're Frank Reich and you're I'm sure the quarterback conversation came up during these interviews. All right, what do you want to do? And he's coming off of what he had just went through with the Indianapolis Colts. This organization in the Carolina Panthers is coming off of trading for Sam Darnold, trading for Baker Mayfield. Both of those moves.
Drafting Matt Corral on a trade up.
It seems really weird if they all of a sudden just were like, you know what? Screw all that previous stuff that we went through. Derek Carr is going to be the difference here. I just don't see that being a realistic possibility. Or a smart possibility.
I don't think. Look, it's definitely not off the table at all. If Frank Reich likes Derek Carr, and we don't know that. I think the difference with Derek Carr and a guy like Jacoby Brissett, and certainly Derek Carr is played at a higher level than Jacoby Brissett in totality for their careers. The difference with Jacoby Brissett, and look, I'm a Jacoby Brissett stan. You can see it over NC State stuff. And you are too, probably, because you're a Pats guy. Like, I mean, he's beloved everywhere he goes, first of all. He brings a steady presence to the locker room. He won't complain at all if he's benched, whether it's for a creep midseason or some rookie that you drafted that you need to start. Like, Jacoby Brissett is the perfect type of locker room guy. He's Frank Reich's guy. And with Derek Carr, you're going to have to sign him to a big deal if you sign him, or you may have to trade for him. Whereas Brissett's a low-cost option who can be a placeholder. And you can say, look, man, I went 7 and 9? 7 and 9 in 2019 with Jacoby Brissett when Andrew Luck retired right before training camp. And I also add, I think you could say that, Will McClain says, I'm not trading anything for Derek Carr. I think about it as a free agent. I don't think Derek Carr is going to get traded. I think that the time frame, he very well could, don't get me wrong. It has to be done 3 days. It has to be like agreed to within 3 days of the Super Bowl. So after the Super Bowl, they're going to cut him. And that's problematic because then you have to wait like a month. And it's like, I don't know. It's just like there's some, if you're there's just some stuff that could get squirrely there.
Is that not similar to what Stafford had to go through last year to a certain degree? Wasn't there a contract thing with him as well?
Maybe Alex Smith had the same thing where it's like he was traded right after the Super Bowl. So it's totally possible he gets traded. I'm just saying if you're looking at the timeline for the Raiders, I'd just rather play chicken with them. And it's like, if you can find a trade partner, great. If not, I'll go sign somebody else. I think a loser is Sam Darnold too, because Darnold, if Steve Wilkes had kept the job, I think Darnold was very likely to sign some sort of deal in Carolina just to keep some cohesion going there. Wilkes, for as good as he was, and as well as I think they played well under him, they didn't really have a plan offensively per se. Man, I tell you what would have been Frank Reich with Christian McCaffrey would have been fun too, but oh well. Yeah. Here we are. Okay. Anything else from the Frank Reich hire? I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, no, I listen. I think it's a good hire. It stinks for Steve Wilkes. I mean, that would have, but in a vacuum with Frank Reich, like I said, they might have just hired the best coach in the division all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the baseball term would be like, I don't think it's like maybe a home run. I think Sean Payton is a home run. I think Frank Reich is a stand-up double
for sure.
It's like it's just and it could end up being a grand slam if he's given the time and sort of the leeway to do what he wants to do at the quarterback position, which I really don't think that he ever, obviously he never really got, he was able to bring in veterans, but the Colts kept winning games. They never had a high draft pick.
Yeah.
So
my thing would be just, again, don't fall in love with the veteran guy, like Daniel was saying with Derek Carr or anything like that. We saw what Frank Reich did when he fell in love with Carson Wentz and brought him into Indianapolis. It obviously didn't work out. This is a go down to the studs, draft, develop. You have a solid head coach. Let's see what he can build around it.
Agree completely. All right, that'll do it for us. That is the Frank Reich Hired Emergency podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. For Ryan Wilson, who's here and left, for Sully, I'm Brinson. We'll see you guys later.